First, ignore the Boston accent the entire time while I'm up here, please. Laugh at the end. So I want to introduce first Josh Harris from FILMHEDGE, who's going to tell us how lucky we are to be in the film business and how easy it is to finance. Josh, good Atlanta boy. Mark's going to be, come on up. Insurance expert. Has been in the business how long, Mark?
35 years.
Only 35 years, so believe what he says. Mark's going to tell us about risk and break down how we can still make movies in this climate and protect our investment. Adrian, come on up. Adrian runs a line. Adrian Politowski is similar to what I do. You do film finance, production, and everything in between. Adrian's basically the expert of how we make movies now from start to finish. So right now he's in the middle of a raise. He's going to finance all of your movies. I'm the expert. I witnessed it. He told me. And then last but not least, Jonathan Bross. Jonathan, please come on up. Jonathan runs Ashland Hill, focused on lending predominantly, right? So basically what I'm excited about in hosting this panel is I feel like we're in an incredible time for opportunity in the industry because I think there's so much movement and change. And these guys live it every single day, so I want you to hear from their mouth how to be creative and unlocking financing for the movies in the future so we keep making this, so we keep making the projects we love and we keep making money for our investors so they keep coming back. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to jump in over there and hopefully I don't have to speak anymore. So nice to meet you guys. So the first question basically, I want to kick it to I think probably Adrian first because it comes from a creative standpoint. In the market we're in right now, obviously with COVID going on for a couple of years, the strikes that everyone's going to be talking about for a while, what are you doing right now to unlock, because you're in the middle of a raise, how are you approaching the industry right now? How are you unlocking capital, and what's the best way for people who don't maybe know the business or understand how to raise financing to jump in and be successful?
So we're both in the middle of raise and deploying funds, so we get to see, but the first thing is, whether it's COVID or whether it's the strike now, we take a long-term view. Film cycles go on for years. What's happening right now is, and there's always disruption in the market. I've been in here for 20 years, and more often than not, every can there is something new, something going on. And so I think the disruption is, generally speaking, is very much part of our industry. We're in a high, very fast-paced industry, and it is just part of the environment, and you have to deal with that. And when you're raising funds, you kind of have to bake that into your risk management model. And the same when you're deploying funds. Now is the strike. In a year's time will be something else. I mean, we've seen boom of streamers, and then now much more quiet. So you go through all these cycles, and that is just a natural part of the film industry, especially when you take a long-term view on that.
And thank you for that. So are you, with the current marketplace, do you feel positive or negative about the position we're in going forward for the next year or two? So we've talked about it. It's a long game. It's not a short game. And I think when you hear negative comments, it's people that are short-time focused or short-sighted. And I think the positive is it always comes around. So what's your take? What's your view right now?
Well, if you take a really big step back, bad times or good times, people want to be entertained. So there is always a demand for good content, and that will, there always will be opportunities to finance good content, and people will want to watch good content. So that is really, I think, at the core. So one of the things we always look for is how strong is the team that is making the movie, and how strong is the script, how well is it positioned in the marketplace, is it a clear positioning. And as long as you have these things figured out, I think you'll always have people like us willing to finance, and you'll always have people on the other end willing to watch it.
I mean, we've talked about IP and the value of that. We'll get to that in a couple of questions later, but I agree with you. To the rest of the guys, how are you evaluating risk right now in the current marketplace we're in, the marketplace we left over the past 2 years, post-COVID? What's changed for you, and how are you staying successful in keeping the projects moving?
Sure, I can jump in. So at FilmHedge, there's really two obvious ways that we're helping productions get through ups and downs and ebbs and flows in the marketplace, volatility, and Adrian said it right. There's always going to be something, right? It's going to be COVID, it's going to be a strike, it's going to be something. It just like every other business there is in every other industry, there are ebbs and flows to this industry. But a couple of things specifically at FilmHedge. We're a fintech media finance platform. So we are introducing private capital into the marketplace in a way that many private institutions have not done yet. And certainly institutional lenders are not accessing this sort of capital. So number one, it's all these private equity groups and venture capitalists, all the ones who are very liquid, who are interested in lending or investing in film, but they don't know what they don't know. FilmHedge is a home where you can come and say, here's my buy box, here's my risk appetite, here's exactly what I want to be and do and make out of this industry. And we source the projects, we risk rate the projects, underwrite the projects, and marry the two together. So it's a mutually beneficial thing. That's the sole purpose of FilmHedge, is how can we put more capital to work for our industry. The second sort of, I guess, less obvious way that's very specific is the formula that we use for advancing funds to production. So we can incorporate gap lending as well as collateralized lending, tax credits, pre-sales, things like that, distribution agreements. We can incorporate them together in one master note and advance higher net to production, which helps people meet the strike price. And this guy's probably much better versed to talk about risk, the insurance guy in the room, but that's a very important element for FilmHedge and all productions, particularly as there's volatility in the marketplace, is to have a good insurance program in place and a good lender.
Thank you for that. The question before we get to risk, because I want you both to talk about a little more about that, is for the people that are here to make movies, they're here to produce, develop, finance, how do you guys get to a yes if someone's bringing you a project, all of you? If they're bringing you a project and saying, listen, I want to make my passion project, I have X amount of equity, I have great actors, I have a great package, what can they say or do to get you to a yes in this marketplace and in general?
Well, for us, we're a lender, and so we look at collateral. So, I mean, I was going to say, the way we de-risk is the way we've always de-risked. You only back successful projects, right?
Exactly. Inside joke.
Well, and that's what we're looking for, is we're trying to evaluate what the value of the project is going to be, because we're making a loan. So we're different than the equity guys, where they're trying to get that upside. We just want to make sure that the film gets produced, gets delivered, gets distributed, and then we're very happy to have been part of that.
And you like much more equity to debt ratio, I would assume, right? To lessen your risk.
We do. I mean, we like having an equity because we like to have more people, more eyes on the project, because that tends to make a better project.
Adrian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to come back to your question, one of the things that can help, that helps a lot really, and what we don't see enough of is producer comes, and of course, great producers, that's the team behind, that's all the important, but that they're realistic about the expectations. I mean, a lot of the conversations we have with producers are, your budget is too high and doesn't fit in the value of the marketplace. And there's often a disconnect, and often there's like an impetus of producers having wishful thinking, I'm going to ask for something much more, maybe I'll get it. And it doesn't work like that, and actually taints the image you have of the project, because you're like, okay, these people have unrealistic expectations, they don't understand the market. And that is something we see quite a lot on, maybe especially more candid producer or like newer producers.
So it's just people being students of the industry, students of the business, help get you to a yes. They save time, they understand what their weaknesses are, and they understand how to protect the investment for you.
Exactly, and being realistic about what you asked versus the value of the project in the marketplace. I think that is very, very key.
Well, I think the biggest thing, and all the filmmakers in the room know this, is when you're so passionate about your project, you don't really want to hear any of that. You want to make your movie. None of this is all a different language, and I've been in that same position from both sides. I think you get to a point where you manage your risk, right? You take shots where you can, based on mitigating risk in every other risk category that's possible, because actors are always changing. What's valuable is always changing, right? So I think there's always, with the joke, there's always a level of risk when you're evaluating your risk profile, right? So I think as a filmmaker, from my company, Compelling, we basically develop everything in-house and fully finance it or bring on financial partners, because when you're getting to a place where you need to just push through risk, a risk time, you have to be able to move. You're not letting creative be dictated by financial terms or by, outside lending or any other situations that you can't control. It's very hard to be in that position, right? Everyone, it's a team building business. You can't make a movie without a team. So these guys are so valuable in my eyes, because when you're starting out or you have your second, third movie, you're not making a movie without these guys. And the most important thing, obviously, and what I want to kick it to Mark, is insurance. Mark, insurance.
I'll add one thing,
Yeah.
which is we look at the people who are on the other side of the table as well.
Yep.
We want to build long-term relationships, and dealing with honest people is what it's all about. So I would say when people, you were very nice in saying bring unrealistic expectations. I've sometimes said that people will say things to us that sometimes turn out not to be true.
That's shocking. Shocking. How in the movie business?
And we remember those people.
So we're going to jump to IP in a minute, but I just want Mark to break down insurance, because right now, just to give you a little background, when we were shooting our Whitney Houston movie in Massachusetts, we shot in the middle of COVID. We shot with an IATSE strike pending, essentially, and it was a very big risk to deliver. We had incredible insurance. We had essential element insurance, which basically, if one of our main actors went down or got sick, the movie wouldn't be a total risk. And that was the most important thing for us. We were taking the gamble to deliver the movie when we needed to, and without what Mark does, we wouldn't have been able to. So I just want him to break down how you would work in this market. You've been through a few in 35 years, so what does it look like?
Sure, I have, thanks. But I'd like to, kind of talk about insurance in two chapters. One is before COVID, and then COVID and insurance terminology, we call that kind of a universal black swan event, probably a once-in-a-generation kind of scenario, but it affected everybody, not just film, everybody. And what you found out is, and a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to that, not everything is insurable. Insurance companies could not have charged enough money to cover all COVID claims. With that said, there were actually some film products that did respond, because they were broad, and did cover COVID-related insurance production claims. Not a lot.
Spotted Risk, was that one of the companies?
Spotted Risk came about during COVID, and they tried to create a product to help manage the COVID exposure for productions when COVID was still hot. But what quickly happened after that is insurance companies tightened up their endorsements, and they had something on their policies called a communicable disease exclusion, and they made sure that their wording was tight enough so that they weren't picking up COVID-related claims that they didn't want. But fundamentally, always remember this. There's many ways to manage risk. Most of the time, we only think about insurance. Insurance is the most expensive way to manage risk. It's also the most limiting. It's a unilateral contract, and it's all been modified and boiled down by lawsuits and law, but at the same time, it's something you need, and it does help in many situations, and certainly you manage some risk yourself. In the news landscape going forward, will there actually be, for example, insurance for COVID? They may at some point loosen up and provide some kind of token sublimits. We were talking just before this about how does insurance respond to strike scenarios. There's something called civil authority coverage that can be attached to a production package policy. But the insurance companies are not willing to go on the full hook to reimburse production companies, because it's kind of a known event. They'll cover maybe a certain token amount, but there'll be restrictions on the coverage. So in as much as film financing is an ever-evolving, fluid landscape, insurance is in some respects too, So with strikes, or now AI is very big with your media liability, how are insurance companies going to respond to AI, and can you get a media liability policy that's going to protect you if someone sues you? And the truth on that one is the jury's still out. There's not enough legal precedent. So ultimately, the role that I play as a broker is I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I want to find solutions for my clients. So there's a dance. There's a dance that I have to play with my underwriters because I want to get what I want, but I don't want to burn that bridge when I need something. And I want to deliver and provide a solution to my client, to the production company. And it can be complicated and nuanced, but that makes it fun sometimes, because sometimes you're dealt with unique scenarios in every film. It could be anything from cast insurance issues or stop date issues. It can be weather issues, and ultimately, finding a solution in the insurance market. It can be challenging sometimes, but sometimes there's a way to do it, and you can get creative, and there's certain ways to get creative to do that. Like I said, it's an ever fluid dynamic. You need to stay in touch with the markets and your underwriters to know if their appetite has changed, and then just in general, insurance worldwide creates other kinds of unique scenarios. You might have to make local placement for coverage, and that can create this unexpected thing. So getting the insurance component involved in your production image and early on is really vital, because it can be really painful when you think you've thought of everything, and then you introduce getting your insurance, and you find out that you had kind of overlooked some of these vital things, and now you've got a hitch.
Also, to play on that, Mark, the insurance company tends to know things before we do, because they make money and lose money by not knowing things. So just a quick funny anecdote I think you'll enjoy is we were prepping a movie in Bangladesh. We were filming a movie about the founding of Bangladesh, the war in '71, which is a war that very few people know about in history from outside of the region. I wasn't taught it as an American, and it's this amazing underdog story. We were there prepping the movie. We were 10 weeks through prep. We were about to shoot. We were struggling to get insurance anywhere in the world to insure this production in Bangladesh. India is much easier to insure. Bangladesh didn't have a robust film industry. We had the government support. We had everything on our side to make this a success. Not one insurance company would insure us. And then the one that did about 2 weeks before production was a Canadian company, and in their exclusions, this word COVID-19 pops up before anyone was really talking about it. So they, of course, were like, hey, you guys are in trouble. Don't go shoot this movie because we're not insuring it. But it's always good to keep in touch with your insurance brokers to see what the next problem is in the region that you're shooting or where you're going to shoot, because they know it before you do, or their company goes out of business. So for me, that's what I learned about the insurance business through COVID. I want to talk about, which it's been relevant for us. And I think early on, in the Clubhouse days when everyone was talking about where's the business going next, the biggest thing, seats are always leaving the table when you talk about big productions, film, new streamers come in, studios disappear. How are you getting a seat at the table with the business changing all the time? My personal answer is, and I want to hear from you guys, is if you have the best IP, if you have big projects that are sort of cover a worldview or have a big audience, whether they exist or are from outside of the United States, they're a world story, something based on big intellectual property, I feel like you always have a seat at the table. You'll always have the ability to cast those bigger names, to find those bigger directors, and to find investors and lenders that are more apt to take a chance on you. So how do you guys feel when you're evaluating a project on something that has a guaranteed built-in audience versus something that's an original idea that has no built-in audience and is not based on IP? Do you take that into account when you're lending or financing?
Sure. It's one component of what we look at. We look at the overall package. So we're looking at the people, we're looking at what it is that they're making, and we're running the numbers and running our analytics, and the built-in audience definitely helps.
Is there a number, like in your model, do you put a number on, if Matt Damon walks in and brings you a project, is there less risk there in your model than there would be if I walk in with a project that has no following and I don't have a star listed? And what is that? How does that break down?
Well, I don't want to be rude.
I think it's good for people to know what the value of IP is. It's good for people to know what the value of bringing value. And I'll give an anecdote, and I think you'll play off of it. So as a good Italian American boy, when I would show up to my grandmother's house, it's my grandmother, but I never showed up empty-handed because she would give me a whack over the head, right? So you're going there to eat her food, you're going there to take her love, but you have to bring a dessert. You have to bring something to say thank you for having me, my grandmother, right? It's the same thing in the movie business. If you're walking in to see any of these guys and you're not bringing value up front, I think it's harder to get value from them, right? And that's what I always try to teach people. How are you bringing value to receive value? So bringing value is a script that won a festival or was rated, is on the blacklist. Bringing value is an actor from the country you're from that matters. Bringing value is big IP. So I want to take it to Adrian, but I want you to chime on it as well. How important to you is IP? I know it's basically a good half of your business.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think all of us, what we focus a lot on is the downside. Any project is very easy to imagine. Best case scenario, you have your film in Cannes, you have an amazing worldwide deal, and that's very easy. What I think we spend a lot of time is what happens on a rainy day, and what is the intrinsic value of the film if things go bad. So, and that is, it's not an exact science, and it's a lot of things that come into your director, your cast, the positioning of the film, the genre, and IP plays in that because it gives you downside protection. Like if you have Matt Damon in an indie film, that's going to give you a lot of downside protection. And when it comes to IP, it's you have some IP that might be strong in some countries only. So you factor that in and saying, oh well, that is strong in Germany and in Italy. So the sales there will be potentially higher, but it's weak in the English language world. So you adapt depending on where your IP is strong. And the same goes with actors. Some actors are very strong domestically and less value international, and vice versa.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the reason why it's super relevant, the IP question is super relevant, is because that's what drives collateral for your film. And the collateral for your film is how you get your film done, right? That's what you're going to borrow against. So with good IP, good storytelling, and great characters, that draws in great cast members, which have a monetary value to the projects they attach to. So as we talk about the process of script to screen, which is super relevant for filmmakers and everybody, that's the purpose of this panel, is to how do we unlock creative capital. This process that everyone's touched on is talking about, that's how you unlock creative capital. You start at the beginning with storytelling, you start at the beginning with what's my narrative? Is it going to be something that can be marketed and sold? And what's the audience that I'm selling to? And then ultimately, who's going to tell the story? That's the cast members that they're talking about. Because there is, in the day of social media, in the day of social marketing, there is a value that you can put on a Matt Damon or someone else like that attaching to your script. And then all of a sudden a sales agent says, yeah, I can sell a Russell Crowe psychological thriller based on a best-selling novel. I can do that. So let me go out and do that for you. And those sales are what we at FilmHedge collateralize against and give you the money to make your film.
Excellent. So just to play on the IP, further the IP discussion, when people are starting out, I'm not sure the audience here where everyone's at, when we go into questions, we'll talk about it, but starting out is very hard when you don't have relationships in the industry, right? I mean, this is my 15th Cannes. You guys have all been here a ton. When you don't have relationships in the industry, it's very easy to be discouraged and think, how am I ever going to get there? I mean, it's a trial and error situation, but it all starts with a script. If you have a story that is valuable to you, it's probably and hopefully valuable to other people. And if you are making a story about where you come from, that makes the most unique and interesting story. So the more specific, the more global, actually. So being from Boston, you'll never hear me stop talking about it because people can relate to it, even in its specificity. So if you look at the movies that come from Boston, The Departed, The Town, Gone Baby Gone, Mystic River, that have all, a few Oscar winners recently. You relate to it. I've traveled all over the world. I've shot movies all over the world. And I love finding stories that I relate to that I shouldn't relate to, that are so specific that they have a global reach. And I think it starts with the screenplay. if you have a screenplay you love, you need to get it to festivals. You need to submit to, short contests, script contests, festivals, so that you can bring value to us up front. Maybe, and Adrian might jump on and say, wow, I really love that script. I'm going to package it for you. I'm going to produce on this one. I'm going to add Matt Damon because I know him. And I'm going to add my partners on the stage, and they'll finance it in one shot. So to make a movie for Adrian or Josh or Jonathan or anybody else, basically what we do is we make a phone call. For you guys, it might be, man, I have a script, what do I do, right? But that's the value you're bringing to the table and to the stage. So I would say don't get discouraged. Focus on what you have and what you bring. And I think if you find value and you do the right thing and you learn the industry and how to get to people, other people will find value. But the biggest thing, you just mentioned it, do not lie when you're pitching your projects. Don't say you have somebody you don't. Don't say it's going to make hundreds of millions of dollars when the guys that you're pitching it to know it won't, because they know the industry. Just say, this is what I have and I love it and this is why it's interesting.
The point, Jeff, that I want to touch on, and that's the importance of these festivals, because this industry, as you all know, is very relationships centric, right? It's about who are you surrounding yourself with, and it's very important. Jonathan mentioned it earlier with the team around you. We invest in the team, we lend to the team. It's equally important as the story itself, as who's making this picture. And these festivals serve a very specific purpose. I actually just spoke at a panel. I had to run from that one to this one. And a young lady asked me, she said, I don't know where to start. I said, guess what? You're at the largest, most celebrated festival in the world. You have hit the start button. And all of you should be congratulated for being here, because this is a huge step forward. But don't forget about the smaller festivals and domestic festivals like at the Atlanta Film Festival, one of the top 10 rated film festivals in North American continent.
He's from Atlanta, everybody. Just so you know.
I happen to be the chair, so I'm just giving a little plug, shameless plug. So thank you. So we just had it. It was a very successful festival. But those festivals, there's 2 Oscar qualifying categories at the Atlanta Film Festival. Like, who knew, right? So you can go to the Atlanta Film Festival, submit your project or your pitch, your pitch book, your look book, things like that, and your project all of a sudden becomes very relevant to the Matt Damons of the world, because they say, wait, this screenplay was, won Atlanta or saw Atlanta, or South by Southwest is another great one. There's plenty of great markets around the world that you need to attend, create relationships. That's what we're here for. That's what everyone came to Cannes for, is to cultivate relationships, and it's the center of what we do in the film and TV business.
He just came to tell me he's from Bangladesh. We'll talk about it after. You're going to like the movie, by the way. So you make a very good point, Josh. We talked about this earlier, but how important to you guys is the film festival and the market circuit? I've made some of the greatest friends coming to all these festivals, but also when you build friendships and you build trust with people that you know are honest, that's how it makes it easier to make your next movie or to sell your next movie. So for you guys, how important have the festivals and markets been in your success?
This is a very relationship-oriented business. I tell people all the time, this is a team sport. And we work on a lot of projects with a lot of people. We want to build these long-term relationships. And yeah, we can talk to each other over Zoom, we do all the time, right? But there's nothing like being at the festival to reconnect in person. And so that's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, and you going to all the festivals, you see also the same people. You like, first time we met, I think, was in Berlin. We met, then again we had lunch yesterday. It's like you meet again and again, you cement a relation, and as you say, it's team and it's trust. And at the end of the day, making a movie is like launching a company. It's very intense. It's everybody's in it, and you need to be able to trust your partners. Because without that, every movie runs into problems. So if you don't have the trust, it's very hard to overcome these.
So I come from kind of what I would consider a different perspective, because I consider myself more of a vendor, because I'm providing a product or a service, and I don't want to interfere with people pitching ideas, people financing things, people acquiring the rights to stuff. But what I do find is that by getting in the mix in a festival, and making sure that you get out of your comfort zone and introduce yourself to people, I never know where I'm going to find a new client or a new high-valued relationship, or he or she might know someone else. So for a festival, for me, it's a high concentration, like everyone said. You cannot find a higher concentration of potential networking opportunities anywhere else in the world than right here. And it's taken a few years. It takes a year or two just to kind of understand what's going on here, and then you understand there's different layers here. But ultimately, you need to commit yourself to making relationships, developing relationships, talking to anybody, and you never really know where that relationship that you've just made might lead to. You might be targeting specific people you want to talk to, you don't know how to get to them, but all of a sudden you might find that there's a way to get to them through another relationship. So build those relationships, and then when you come back, you feel more comfortable here. You kind of know the landscape, you know what's going on, you kind of know the drill, and over time you'll show up and you'll know more people, and that'll grow. Jonathan and I found out backstage we share a mutual friend. I took a selfie. I texted him and he called me, which was kind of funny, And it's a guy he's the president of a film company. But so kind of those things happen. So just kind of lean in and kind of transcend your reluctance and timidness. And like you said, be sincere and be honest and be transparent. You cannot BS these guys. These guys have heard it all a million times. So you need to be forthright and honest and sincere, and you have a greater opportunity of building a good reputation for yourself and making your dream come true.
Amazing, thank you, Mark. You want to finish up, Josh? We have one more minute.
I think the panel has said it, and I talked about it just a moment ago with the importance and significance of the festivals. I'd much rather deploy that time into questions from the audience.
So we're going to jump to questions.
I will point out that only at Cannes could you find a cameraman from Bangladesh.
Well, hopefully there's more of them. It'll help make my movie when the movie start back up. So we're going to jump to questions. Closed mouths don't get fed. So everyone, please ask the craziest questions. Right here.
This is a question for Josh. Thanks all of you for a great panel. I'm just wondering, does FILMHEDGE actually mean for international productions as well? And how do you recognize the talents from countries you don't know? For example, are your investors from just from the States, or they're coming from elsewhere? And how do you value the project, for example, in Everything Quiet in the Western Front? They had an actor who never played in a movie before, and a lot of talents who we never knew about them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and for being here. And I will tell you, hang out for the panel at 5, because you're going to speak to sales agents there, and they're going to have a much more educated answer for you in terms of assigning value to talent. But I will speak on this. Yes, FilmHedge is an international company with hundreds of millions of dollars to access from private capital for putting projects like yours together. We're shooting a film in Malta right now. We have a film that we just wrapped in Australia. So by far, the domestic market is, domestic USA market is the largest market in the world. So we have to be mindful of the value that does bring to our industry. But to say that there's not value in name brands overseas would be a huge disservice, because absolutely different markets have different actors that can attach to project, different directors even that can attach to project, and add tremendous value in that specific market, and maybe lesser known in other markets like the US. So you can get your film made if it's a German film, if it's a Chinese film. You can get your film made based off of local talent that's well known. Particularly social media has a lot of influence now. How many followers do they have? I've seen programs brought to me that I could not move forward on because of the capital stack and the collateral stack, but because the person on Instagram had 20 million followers, there was private capital lining up at the door to get that done in that specific territory. So I say hang out, talk to the sales agents, because they're going to have a very detailed answer for you, but the answer is yes, and there is a pathway forward for you. And thank you for the question.
I think, just to touch on that, I think you hit something on the head. When you're coming from a region, a country, there are other people locally that have put the same value that you put on something that's unique to where you come from. I've raised a lot of money out of Massachusetts and New England with stories that are based on New England. I've raised money out of Bangladesh for a project about Bangladesh. I think when you come with capital, when you come with equity from a place that you're from, where you're telling the story, it adds value for us to see that someone else is taking a risk on this film, someone else cares about this film from where you come from. And I think it's also being realistic for what your budget is, right? If you're making a movie that's specific to, pick a random place. It's, Nollywood's a huge place. Let's pick a random place. Cape Verde, right? Which is an island off the coast of Africa that very few people know exists. It's in Boston, we have the biggest population outside of Cape Verde. If you're making a Cape Verdean film, you have to think about who the market for that is, and if there's a small market, you have to make it for a price, because it's about mitigating your risk, right? So if you want to tell a story from where you're from, and you can't make it for $100 million, then you shouldn't make it for $100 million. You should make it for less. Make it for $100,000 and make it so great that people can't ignore it. And that's the best advice I can give you about that. Any other questions? Right here.
I just had a question in terms of budget. I know you're talking about make a budget that's realistic, but are there, in the earlier panel she said 5 to 10 million was her sweet spot, but are there budgets that are too small for you, or do you have to have a certain type of budget? And if you have a relatively low budget and you are being realistic, what are the challenges to that in coming to you guys? Because I just hear all the time, oh, your film's too small, don't come to us.
I'm gonna jump in first from a creative equity standpoint. If your movie, these guys all have different price ranges of what's valuable to them and where they get, because it's the same amount of work. So that's why people have a certain number that they have to hit in order to do the work, to be a part of the project. For me as a producer, I've made projects that were 100,000 to almost 100 million. So it really depends on the project for me individually. But for financiers, if you have a project that's budgeted $1 million or under, find money where you're from, find equity, because you get the creative freedom to make that movie and show what you can do. And that's what makes you valuable to these guys on your next movie. So I would say if it's a very low budget movie, get creative. Raise it online, raise it with friends, find like-minded people who love that subject, and don't take no for an answer. If I can raise money, I promise you can raise money, because I can barely speak, I'm not too great at it. Barely speak English, and that's my only language. So I would say for these guys, we've all talked about the dollar amounts that matter to you as far as getting involved in a project. I don't know if you want to run down them and just say where you start, where your sweet spot is.
What I was just going to add is, for a small project, don't forget to allocate some of the money that you raise to marketing. Because many of these smaller first-time producers will get enough to make the movie, and then they've made the movie, and then they wonder why it doesn't magically appear in theaters all over the world. So don't forget about the marketing. For us, we try to deploy, I guess the sweet spot would be sort of 5 million plus or minus 2, but we also will go up market from there. When it gets lower, under that, it usually becomes sort of uneconomical, and we'd rather not. We want to have good relationships with people.
For us, in terms of budget, typically $3-4 million would be the lower end, and we've done things up to 50 plus. So it's quite wide range. But as you mentioned, it's the same time you spend on a small budget than a large budget. And I think we all have, certain capital we need to allocate, and it's also our responsibility. So that is why, we can't do 100 movies at, lower end.
Mark, any opinion?
I'll chime in a little bit. To date, I still have no interest or desire in making a film myself, but I probably looked at anywhere between 20 and 30,000 budgets in my life. So the repetition's mother's skill. I can look at a budget and tell you whether or not it's realistic or not, just by looking at the numbers. But more importantly, what I want to share is there's a couple of key things. For the insurance line item, proportionately, the smaller your film, the higher the percentage you should be putting in there for insurance. Be careful if you think you know what insurance is, and the call I always get, it's always entertaining, is, well, that's all I have for insurance. I go, well, you go find the person who told you to put that number in there and see if they can do the insurance for you. And there's a contingency. There should always be a built-in contingency amount in your budget, because ultimately, in all likelihood, you're going to go over budget, and you need to make sure that that money's there and available for you so you can finish your project.
Josh?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of the question around FilmHedge and what we target in on, we're much like Adrian. It's that 3 to 30 is the sweet, 3 million to 30 million is the sweet spot, but we'll go up to 50 on certain movies, and we'll go as low as $1 million on some movies. I've got a movie right now I'm pulling across the closing table is 980,000. So it's a wide range. It's all about the collateral stack. So it's, a tax credit only deal might be only $1 million. And we'll look at it. We were willing to entertain it based on the collateral. But to your question specifically, the lower the amount of your budget, you're going to have to focus higher on equity. The higher your budget, you can focus more on debt. So if you're working under $1 million budget film that you're trying to put together, align yourself with a really good line producer that can help you come up with a good, realistic budget, and focus heavily on equity. And that's going to mean you got to lean into your story, you got to lean into your characters, and you got to find someone as passionate about what you're putting together as you are, and let them invest as opposed to lend. The higher that budget goes, the loan amount can go up as well.
Excellent, thank you, Josh. Next question. One more, we're done. Sadly, we could talk all day, but Amy's pushing us off the stage, so thank you guys for coming and welcome to the